In this episode of the Ben Greenfield Fitness Podcast, the latest science on low-carb diets. Is fasting an eating disorder? Should lean females fast? How to combat sleep deprivation? And much more. Hey Jay, I'm just curious. Before we record these podcast episodes, do you fuel your body with any crazy brews? Do you stick coffee up your backside or dose with psilocybin intranasally or anything funky like that?
What's up, Ben? So I don't do that regularly, which I mean, I guess is either a good or a bad thing. But
which means that irregularly you do snort intranasal psilocybin with coffee enemas.
You have to remember, I'm employed by the federal government, so I won't respond to any of these questions.
Yes. A theoretical J, however.
No, theoretical J really just sticks to coffee and some L-theanine and water. I'm so basic, like it's really sad.
Yeah, that was pretty smooth how you even referred to yourself in the third person, the theoretical J.
I tend to
Very safe. Yeah. You're well versed at this. I, on the other hand, am neither a certified medical practitioner nor employed by the federal government, so I can talk about just about anything with very little risk of litigation. And
yeah, that's true.
I should say that I actually did come up with a pretty interesting recipe this morning off the top of my head that wound up tasting pretty damn good. And
tell me about it.
Well, I brewed coffee and I did it French press style just because sometimes I like to make it thick as mud. So, you know, I take my coffee. Of course, only Keon coffee. Only the best will do.
Shameless plug.
Yes, of course. And then once the French press coffee is ready, what I did this morning was I kind of went overboard with the ingredients, but this, again, wound up tasting amazing. I took a couple dropperfuls of one of my favorite forms of stevia, which is organic butterscotch toffee stevia. There's this company called Omica Organics that does this really high-end stevia. So I did a couple dropperfuls of that, and then about a half teaspoon or so of salt. And I added this in a NutriBullet to something called My Cacao. And My Cacao, my friend Tucker Max turned me on to this. He doesn't drink coffee, but he drinks this giant piping hot cup of chocolate every morning. However, it's calorie-free. It has all the theobromine, all the dopamine-enhancing compounds of coffee, or of chocolate, or cacao rather, but it's just kind of a blend of cacao nibs and cacao shells. Like super high-end organic shit. So
that's good stuff.
I of course can't stand the thought of just drinking that all by itself. That would be far too boring. So right. I put that in.
You're not me.
No, I'm not Jay. I'm not employed by the federal government. I can F up my coffee however I please. So I took the cacao, about 2 tablespoons of the dry cacao nibs and cacao shells, this My Cacao stuff. And then I put the stevia on top of that. I put the salt on top of that. And this was all in like a little NutriBullet container. And remember, I've got my French press coffee already ready on the side. And then the last 2 things I put in there was a couple packets of Four Sigmatic. Yes, 2 packets of Four Sigmatic Lion's Mane. And then also 2 packets of Four Sigmatic Chaga, right? So I've got all my medicinal mushrooms in there, my stevia, my salt, my cacao. And then what I did was I poured the super muddy coffee on top of that into the NutriBullet and then blended it for about 90 seconds. And when you pour it out of the NutriBullet, it's like the texture of mud, like it's chocolate mud. And it tastes absolutely stellar. That's probably about a $10 cup of whatever I made, but man, well worth the smile on my face and the happiness that I derive from all that dopamine. So not only did I drink it, but I wrote down everything I did. I wrote down the whole recipe, and I'll put it in the show notes for people. So if you're listening,
good call.
And you want to try this, go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/399. You may or may not want to also add a microdose of, brace yourself, you probably know what's coming next.
I know.
Psilocybin in there.
Yeah.
I could
have done everything you just Yeah, I could have done everything you just mentioned except for the psilocybin due to, drug testing in the federal government. But everything you did, I mean, it sounds like a mushroom cup of joe, or I guess what I would say, a cup of mushroom with a side of coffee, because that was a lot of mushroom.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's good. I've got alkaloids and dopamine and theobromine and all sorts of stuff floating through my bloodstream right now. So what do you think? Should we do this?
Yeah, let's do this.
All right. Well, as I alluded to in the introduction, a few new studies on low carbohydrate diets. The first, and of course, if you're a new listener, this is the time of the show when we go over some of the more compelling items of research and things that I've tweeted over at twitter.com/Ben Greenfield the past couple of weeks. And this first one was very interesting. It was a study in the Journal of the Frontiers of Physiology that looked at the effects of a 12-week, very low carbohydrate, high-fat diet on maximal aerobic capacity, high-intensity intermittent exercise, and cardiac autonomic regulation. So basically kind of like heart rate variability or autonomic nervous system activity. So this was a 12-week study, which is a decent amount of time. Like that's enough time for kind of fat adaptation to occur versus some of these more, slightly subpar, feed someone a low-carb diet for 3 days or for 2 weeks or whatever the case may be. So
the 12-week was a good thing. No, I'm glad to see that.
Yeah, and then they tested maximal graded exercise test, which is essentially like a VO2 max test. They did a high-intensity interval training session. They did what's called a 30-15 intermittent fitness test for maximal aerobic capacity, and they compared this very low carbohydrate, high fat diet to what they call a habitual diet, which would just be kind of like a standard. I think it was around 50 to 60% carbohydrate intake. And what they found was that 12 weeks of a very low carbohydrate, high fat diet did not impair high-intensity exercise lasting up to 25 minutes, nor did it impair maximal cardiorespiratory performance, nor did it impair autonomic nervous system activity or like kind of suppress heart rate variability, for example. And so, we already know from studies in the past, like Jeff Volek's FASTER study, for example, that even though a low-carbohydrate or high-fat or ketogenic diet does not enhance aerobic performance, neither does it impair aerobic performance. And this study goes on to show that it doesn't seem to impair high-end exercise performance either. It doesn't give you an advantage, but when you look at this in the light of some of the implications for overall stabilization of glycemic variability and perhaps a reduction in some cardiometabolic risk factors, perhaps a reduction in some of the diabetic risk factors that may arise with a standard carbohydrate dosing for athletes, it turns out that this is something that you may want to look into. I would say that the only kind of failure of this study was that the supervised HIIT session and the 30-15 intermittent fitness test, which was the test for maximal aerobic capacity, those are conducted once a week. And so if you try to extend this study to kind of like a hard-charging athlete, an MMA fighter, an obstacle course racer, a CrossFitter, etc., or of course anyone involved in a sport that involves fluctuations between anaerobic and aerobic performance, like soccer or tennis, you can't quite say that this parallels what a hard-charging athlete would experience. And I still stand by my recommendations for those folks to indeed kind of have your cake and eat it too, so to speak, by staying in a somewhat low carbohydrate state during the day and then post-workout and also in the evening, making sure that you get some kind of a carbohydrate bolus into your body, so you're perhaps consuming 150 to 200 grams of carbohydrates a day, mostly in a post-workout or in an evening refeed scenario. But for the average exercise enthusiast, this is probably a study that you could take and say, okay, well, I can eat somewhat low carbohydrate and still get away with enhanced performance. And of course, the final thing to note is that this study did not look into things like triglycerides, inflammatory markers, some of the things that tend to be more individualized in terms of genetic variation in response to a low-carb diet. There are some people with a more deleterious kind of inflammatory response to saturated fats. There are some people who do not do so well just from a pure gut standpoint due to whatever bile production or pancreatic enzyme production, et cetera, to a diet high in saturated fats. And there are some people whose microbiome doesn't really agree with a very low carbohydrate, high fat diet. But for the most part, this was at least an interesting study to show that you could limit carbohydrates and still be able to perform high intensity intermittent exercise within reason.
Yeah, no, definitely. I like the points that you made. I'll also point out, because my field of study is in psychophysiology, so they looked at the heart rate variability aspects, and I was a little bit disappointed with this study in the measurements they took, simply because they looked at a 60-second epoch of HRV measurement, and a 60-second epoch is actually very, very, very small. Yeah. And so this research standard is a 24-hour Holter monitor or some form of EKG work. And so they didn't find major differences. They did see kind of like a slight increase in HRV, but my hunch is, and I think that there's other research, past research to support this, is that you might see more significant increases in HRV measurement should you look at more like a 24-hour standard deviation marker. So that was just my one beef with it, but minor beef.
Yeah, and that's the issue with heart rate variability measurements in general. If you look at a lot of the data, even just something very simple from a self-quantification standpoint for people measuring HRV at home, kind of the gold standard is 3 to 5 minutes in a supine position wearing a heart rate variability kind of a chest strap. You know what I find myself saying? I think I've said this like 4 times since we started the episode, kind of. I guess I'm on a kind of
I haven't noticed.
Yeah.
You're on a kind of kick.
Let's make it a drinking game for today's podcast every time I say kind of. So anyways, it's an interesting study, but of course we always, as we talked about in last week's podcast, need to make sure that we take a deep dive and investigate what was actually going on. In this case, not a great deal of exercise, definitely not a volume of exercise that a hard charging or a professional athlete would experience, and also the heart rate variability measurements weren't really gold standard. But regardless, it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there was another very low carbohydrate study that came out this past couple of months, and it was looking at resistance training during a very low carbohydrate diet, again, for 12 weeks. So a decent amount of time. And what this study looked at was eating a low carbohydrate diet and also limiting calories. So now we're talking about caloric restricted for the purposes of weight loss, low carbohydrate diet. And what they found was a significant loss of total body mass in the group of this study that did not engage in resistance training during this low carbohydrate, calorically restricted diet. Now, this is important because, as we've known since, I believe, 2008 studies that were done at University of California, your body can hold on to muscle, even in a calorically restricted state, if a loading stimulus is present, meaning that, as counterintuitive as it may seem to the laws of physics, your body actually engages in some amount of muscle protein retention and sparing of muscle, even if you're restricting calories, if you resistance train during the time that you are dieting. And so, this study kind of points out the fact that that's all the more important, it appears, if you're following a very low carbohydrate diet. So the takeaway from this is if you're going to diet, you need to be lifting weights, period, whether it's a protein sparing diet or whether it's a low carbohydrate diet or whatever the case may be. It's a pretty handy kind of tool in your toolbox to resistance train. And probably one other interesting thing I wanted to note when it comes to muscle retention in a calorically deprived state was one other study that I can also link to this one in the show notes, but it actually used hyperthermia and heat treatments to stave off muscle atrophy and to maintain fitness in people who weren't able to weight lift. So this is often cited, the idea that sauna treatment or infrared sauna or dry sauna, even if you can't exercise, induces this heat shock protein response that allows you to retain muscle. What I should note, though, is that many of these studies, they're using very long periods of time spent in the heat. Like this latest study was up to 2 hours. And
oh, wow.
In this latest study, they were also not using a sauna. They were using this crazy heat machine. I've never used one. It's called a pulsed shortwave diathermy machine. And so they were actually, just like using this machine. I believe this was over the quadriceps muscles to maintain muscle even when the person couldn't work out or couldn't exercise that muscle. Now, I still think, especially based on some of the data that Dr. Rhonda Patrick at Found My Fitness has released, that heat treatment, even just sauna treatments for 30, 40 minutes a day, if you can't lift weights, let's say you're injured or something like that, could still do a decent job maintaining muscle. But this latest study that showed really good results, they were using 2 hours of something called pulsed shortwave diathermy. So
interesting.
The reason I'm bringing all this up is I would say that probably two of the very good things you could do if you're restricting calories, you're dieting to lose weight, would be A, lift weights, and B, if you can get in the sauna or do some heat treatments, all the better for muscle maintenance or to stave off muscle atrophy.
Yeah, good idea. I mean, so my question to follow up is, do you know if they've done any type of comparative studies looking at saunas versus resistance training, or have they not really gotten there yet?
No, but I suspect that as with most of these, we could almost call them biohacks, that the ones that require you to actually put in work, breathe hard, and sweat are the ones that tend to get better results. I mean, there are so many people that just want to jump on the trampoline or stand on the vibration platform or get in the sauna, and you do get to a certain point where you got to pick up the barbell and swing the kettlebell. I mean, like. Yeah,
right. Yeah, you got it.
Especially if you don't just want muscle maintenance, but you also want gains in fitness or improvements in cardiovascular parameters. So,
so you're telling me I have to work for it?
Mm-hmm. Got to work. Got to put in the work. So, related to dieting, there is also, of course, a lot of talk in the media about fasting and whether or not fasting is an eating disorder. And I think that I might be partially responsible, not to sound hubristic, but I think I might be partially responsible for this based on the long discussion that I had with Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, on my podcast, in which he talked all about his 1 meal a day protocol and these long, intensive fasts that he does. And within a couple days after that podcast coming out, everybody was questioning whether, Silicon Valley wellness influencer Jack Dorsey was had an eating disorder or some kind of version of anorexia by fasting.
Screwed over Jack Dorsey.
Yeah.
Way to go.
The New York Times last week published an article called "You Call It Starvation, I Call It Biohacking. Welcome to the broy world of extreme dieting, or is it disordered eating?" This
broy, love it.
Broy, yeah. So this article went into the emerging popularity of 1 meal a day, or even just intermittent fasts, and questioned whether this was actually something that could be classified as an eating disorder, which I personally think is a little bit ridiculous. Meaning to refer to fasting as a disordered obsessive behavior around food, when fasting has been a spiritual discipline, well-recognized spiritual discipline, like voluntarily abstaining from something for a limited amount of time, whether it is certain forms of meat or fish or dairy or olive oil or wine, as we would see in like a traditional Eastern Orthodox Mediterranean type of protocol, to a Ramadan-esque fasting protocol, to any number of other religions that have some element of fasting in them. We know that there are a great deal of spiritual, not to mention physical and physiological benefits that come from fasting. And yeah, you could take this to an extreme level. And I believe we even have a question for this podcast about women who exercise, who are lean and fasting. But ultimately, the pros outweigh the cons to such a great extent, not only for the spiritual disciplines, but also for the physical and physiological benefits, that I think for the New York Times to publish an article like this, calling it an eating disorder, which I think is just a publicity play, based on the fact that, Jack Dorsey, for example, is what do you call it? A lightning rod, I believe is the way that's described for any of these type of things. I just think that there are too many people eating too much food regularly, snacking, grazing, etc., who are going to read this article and think, oh gosh, I'm not going to do a 12 to 16 hour daily intermittent fast, or perhaps a Saturday dinner to Sunday dinner weekly fast, because I might have an eating disorder and I might get labeled by the media as falling into this category. So I was a little bit disappointed in this article.
Yeah, and so I want to give you my take on this, Ben, and listeners, just because this falls, of course, in my area of disordered eating, my area of, as a health psychologist, I have kind of a lot of questions being asked my way, and so I want to kind of address this kind of from my end. So I'm gonna probably get on a soapbox. So let me go.
All right, do it.
So I think that asking the question of whether or not someone with an eating disorder, so especially someone with something like anorexia nervosa, should they be engaging in fasting, and then asking if fasting in and of itself is disordered eating, is completely like two different subject area matters. So disordered eating centralizes on this kind of subjective, and I highlight that word subjective.
You said kind of drink.
Oh, drink. Yeah, exactly. The subjective perception that food intake as related to our body image and our physical status. So if someone has a disturbance in the way in which their body weight or shape is experienced, has undue influence of body weight or shape on their self-evaluation, or if there's a denial kind of the seriousness of their low body weight, and it's like characteristic of someone with anorexia nervosa, then my recommendation is to stay away from fasting. But again, the recommendations for someone with an active, unmanaged eating disorder is going to be vastly different than someone who does not have an eating disorder. So now let's talk about fasting in and of itself, and let me make a semi-controversial statement. Can fasting lead to an eating disorder? And my answer is potentially, which is a great psychologist answer. I think that most of our listeners probably know about orthorexia, which is an actual thing. It's not a diagnosable disorder, but it is a thing. But if you don't know what orthorexia is, it's this obsessive behavior related to constructing a healthy diet. So when we begin to place these extreme walls of rigidity in our thinking regarding food intake or lack thereof in fasting, to where it becomes that we start to have an unhealthy relationship with food, weight, or body image, then it can become an eating disorder. So it all boils down to our relationship with food. If our relationship with our food becomes toxic, then it may be time to reassess. But inherently, fasting does not qualify as disordered eating. All right, end rant.
Yeah. Oh, I like your soapbox, and I'll link to it in the show notes. Not only this article in the New York Times, but also a wonderful article on fasting that the Art of Manliness published. And I think they put it in pretty good context. They say fasting interrupts and resets the hedonic treadmill. It restores an anticipation for eating that has long grown dull. In abstention, our normally saturated senses get a chance to recalibrate so that when we eat again, the food has a bit of its newness back and tastes better than ever. As the old saying goes, hunger is the best spice. And there are, of course, a lot of other benefits to fasting that go beyond that. But I do like this idea of, stoicism combined with occasional hedonism. And it just makes sense. Everything in life operates very well on these work recovery cycles, feed fast cycles. And I don't think it's an eating disorder unless one falls into some of the categories that you were just elucidating. So there you have it.
Right. Right.
One other thing I wanted to mention for the news flashes, and this was a very cool new review that looked into the optimum exercise intensity, type, and duration for boosting mood. It was a systematic review in probably something that you read quite regularly with your feet up by the fireside, Jay, the Journal of Psychology. And
I do.
This one collated evidence from 38 different studies that looked at how hard do you exercise, how long do you exercise, and what kind of effect that had on mood. And there were a few interesting takeaways. First of all, in relation to intensity, the optimum intensity appears to be moderate, because apparently low intensity is too dull, while high intensity is too unpleasant. So if you're looking at the actual intensity of a workout session purely for boosting mood, not for fitness, moderate intensity seems...
that's a good clarification.
Yeah, seems about right. In terms of length, 10 minutes of moderate intensity exercise was sufficient to achieve gains in mood, and there was very little evidence that going beyond 30 minutes led to any further gains in mood. So if you're exercising to manage stress, to manage anxiety, to improve mood, to kind of like blow off some steam after a day at the office, you don't have to go to the gym for an hour-long high-intensity intermittent training session. You can literally go out for 30 minutes at a moderate intensity. You know, for example, going for a long walk, and kind of like we talked about with talked about with high intensity repeat training in last week's podcast. Go for a quick sprint every time you get to a telephone pole, or drop and do push-ups or something like that. And it really does not take that much to get this increase in brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which helps with mood, and also to get some of the other mood-benefiting effects of exercise. So it was pretty interesting. 30 minutes, moderate intensity exercise beats out low intensity, beats out high intensity. 10 minutes suffices. More than 30 minutes doesn't really even seem to give you added benefit.
Right. They also mentioned things that I utilize within my clinic with my patients, like yoga and Tai Chi, Qigong, which are low intensity, but does have a fair amount of research to support its efficacy in reducing autonomic arousal, and decreasing chronic pain. I know we're talking about mood now, but the autonomic arousal stress aspect's important. So I don't want to kind of throw those under the rug too, because while they're not considered moderate intensity exercises, they did allude to those being good as well.
And the best part of the article, I think, was the animated GIF of the bear dancing in aerobic gear. I thought that was really the key, right?
Pretty hardcore, right? It reminded me of, it looked like kind of an episode of Stranger Things going on.
Yeah, never watched that, but I hear it's good. So,
what
is Stranger Things? That's a Netflix show.
Netflix show about some kids who just get caught up in some craziness and some strange things, and that's it.
Well, my favorite TV show, even though I rarely watch TV, is NBC's Songland, because I have a keen interest in singing and songwriting, and in getting more interested in creating music. And this is a pretty cool show where singers and songwriters get up in front of 4 different producers / musicians and have their songs put to the test to see which one is going to get recorded as a single on one of the musicians' albums. And it's a good show. Wow. I like it. It even has
that's cool.
It has a podcast that comes along with it that kind of takes an even deeper dive, kind of like the TED Talks podcast. I really like the TED Talks podcast. I can listen to a TED Talk, and then I can go. It's called TED Radio Hour, and I can go and listen to the details behind how that TED Talk came to be, and special insider interviews with the author, etc. This is like that for music. It's called NBC's Songland, so it's really good.
That's cool. Are you going to be auditioning soon?
No, definitely not.
Damn.
No,
I was waiting
I'll
for
stick to open mic nights at a local Spokane bar. So
right.
Anyway, so that wraps up the news flashes. We'll link to everything that we talked about over at bengreenfieldfitness.com/399. All right, first special announcement is this. We're going to get back into producing some insider podcasts, some of what we call premium material. I right now have about 300 hidden episodes of the Ben Greenfield Fitness Show, along with downloadable PDFs and secret videos and insider interviews. It's all available over at bengreenfieldfitness.com/premium. Or if you go to the Apple Store or the Google Store and you just grab the free Ben Greenfield Fitness app, you can also unlock the premium content within that. The reason I bring it up now is I have an interview. I'll keep it top secret, but I'm releasing it next Monday at the time this podcast comes out. So if you want the premium content, go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/premium. It is the shockingly high price of $9.99 a year. So I know it's going to break the bank, but it's worth the rice and beans diet that you're going to have to get on by subscribing to the premium channel. So
And 90% of it is just you serenading us with your guitar.
Right.
Is that right?
BenGreenfieldFitness.com/premium.
Yeah.
It's a good idea, though. Maybe I'll throw some music in there. This podcast is brought to you by Keon. We are right in the middle of our meditation challenge right now. But Keon, our offices are located in Boulder, Colorado. We basically produce amazing content. If you've never been to getkeon.com and seen our blog there and the articles that we put out, recently we've been focusing on how to make the perfect cup of coffee and just all the ins and outs of coffee and coffee beans in general. You must go to getkeon.com and just subscribe to the content there. But it also has over there all the different supplement formulations I've designed, as well as some of the new ones we're launching, the amino acids, our wonderful Keon cacao chocolate bar, our antioxidant-rich coffee. That is the perfect place to go if you want to shop for supplements and functional foods that have a big old stamp of approval from me. And I've got a 10% code for everybody listening in. It's BGF10 over at getkeon.com. So getkion.com.
It's got my stamp of approval, too.
Jay likes it. I've seen Jay doing some Instagram posts of the coffee, so I know he's a fan. So code BGF10 for 10% off site-wide at getkeon.com. And then another sponsor of today's show is Thrive Market. We may or may not have offended several people after talking about the love fest between Costco and Whole Foods and the illegitimate children that were produced via that relationship. I don't know. I didn't get any cease and desist letters from Thrive Market. But today, may I instead focus on the fact that all of the foods that I order from Thrive Market, all of my favorites, from their organic coconut flakes cereal, which actually tastes like real cereal, very Frosted Flakes-esque, except it's made from coconut meat, to their different versions of spirulina and chlorella, to the wonderful variants of dark chocolate that I get from there that's guilt-free with no added nasties to it, sprouted pumpkin seeds, organic nori wraps that are metal-free, everything that I personally order from Thrive Market. If you just go to thrivemarket.com/Ben, you can find. And if you go to thrivemarket.com/Ben, not only do you get 25% off your first order, and you're looking at organic foods and natural products that are already 25 to 50% below traditional retail prices, with about 70% of the stuff there, stuff you can't find on Amazon, but you'll also get a free 30-day trial to their entire healthy food membership program. So it's a very cool company, very fun website to make your mouth drool as you look through all the different safe and non-toxic foods and personal care products and home cleaning products, everything they have over there. It's thrivemarket.com/Ben is where you can go and find that and check out my pantry foods, all my other recommendations. And we won't say anything else about Thrive Market because last week it got a little out of control. So anyways.
It did, even though I had a buddy of mine at work tell me it was the greatest thing he's ever heard on this show. So I'm just going to leave that there.
Many episodes, I guess. While you're at it, you can also visit the final sponsor for today's show, and that is Native. Do you know what Native is, Jay?
So I know of Native sunglasses, but I don't know of this
Actually,
Native.
Native sunglasses used to be my sponsor back when I'd race triathlons. This is a different Native. You may have heard the Vice episodes in which I debunked a lot of the health myths that Vice put out. This was a couple of weeks ago.
I did.
And one of the things that I talked about was the fact that while they claimed that aluminum-based deodorants and antiperspirants were just fine, there was a host of research showing that aluminum can indeed build up in tissue. So what Native does is they make these very wonderful smelling deodorants filled with ingredients like coconut oil and shea butter and tapioca starch. I think the one I have up in my bathroom right now is coconut vanilla. It really makes me want to lick my armpits.
Yeah, sounds great.
It probably makes anybody I walk past, especially in a gym, also want to just shove their face in my armpit and lick it. Yeah. Yeah.
You think everybody's turning their head to look at your ass, but actually they just want to lick your armpits.
In a very friendly, like non-sexual way. They almost in more like a food sort of way. They want to lick my armpit.
Totally.
Like a totally normal experience. And then they can pick my armpit hair out of their teeth. And that visual should be enough to motivate you to go grab yourself some of the fantastic native products. So you go to nativedeodorant.com, and if you use discount code BEN over there, that gives you 20% off of any of the native products. And may I, once again, highly recommend the coconut vanilla, although they also have lavender rose, cucumber mint, and eucalyptus mint. It's literally like turning your armpits into a fancy juice bar, in my opinion. Yeah,
it is.
Yeah. So nativedeodorant.com, 20% discount code BEN. I think that's it, Jay. What do you think? Should we go answer some questions?
Oh, I think that's it. Let's answer these things.
Hi, Ben. This is Jenny. I have a question for the podcast. I know that you've written many articles on fasting and talked about it on the podcast previously, but I wanted to ask a follow-up question. You've mentioned that fasting doesn't always work so well for lean females, and I wanted to find out if it doesn't work well for lean females, do you mean that they should avoid fasting altogether? Or if there is some sort of a protocol that you would recommend that would not negatively impact lean females with fasting, but that would also allow the person to gain the benefits of fasting. Thank you so much.
Well, as promised, we're going to talk a little bit more about fasting for skinny chicks. Is that offensive for me to say skinny chicks?
So this everything we discuss here is only for skinny chicks?
Lean,
is that what you're saying?
voluptuous females. Yeah.
Lean, voluptuous. Yeah, I think that's worse.
Anyways, I have talked in the past about fasting, and especially fasting for lean and active females. So the idea behind this is that in both men and women, there's something called your hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. It's called your HPG axis. And that controls your three different endocrine glands. So your hypothalamus releases this hormone called gonadotropin-releasing hormone, and that tells your pituitary to release two things, luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone, or LH and FSH as they're known. So LH and FSH then act on the gonads, so the testes in guys, or the ovaries in women, or J. And in women, that triggers the production of estrogen and progesterone. And in men, it triggers the production of testosterone and sperm. So GnRH, that gonadotropin-releasing hormone, the pulses of that are very sensitive to environmental factors, including things like light and activity and, of course, food. So there is some evidence that even short-term fasting can alter that hormonal pulse, and that in women that appears to be more pronounced, and it probably has something to do with this protein-like molecule that neurons use to communicate with each other called kisspeptin. So kisspeptin stimulates gonadotropin-releasing hormone in both men and women, and it's very, very sensitive to appetite-regulating hormones like leptin and insulin and ghrelin. Now, females tend to have much higher levels of kisspeptin than males, which means that females can be a little bit more sensitive to fasting protocols, especially the effect of those fasting protocols on fertility and endocrine-relating hormones or endocrine-regulating hormones like luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone. And that's why, especially in lean females who don't have quite as many fats and cholesterols and DHEA and vitamin D, etc., to go around, that a regular fasting protocol, especially involving fasting periods that seem to exceed about 12 hours, that can actually inhibit things like menstruation and cause amenorrhea. It can limit luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone production, so you can get a downregulation in fertility. In some cases, you see a decrease in insulin-like growth factor to the extent where, since IGF triggers the uterine wall lining to thicken and progress the reproductive cycle, that you again see a downregulation in fertility. And of course, anytime you see a downregulation in fertility, there's also a downregulation in things like libido, overall energy levels. You see a drop in estradiol or overall bioavailable estrogens. So this can be a pretty big issue for females in any state of negative energy balance, but even in a state of positive energy balance, just during periods of time where there is not enough fuel available combined with exercise. Now, this might be confusing to people.
Would you say this
Go
too
ahead.
is for... I was going to say, would you see that this is kind of more for individuals with like a certain body percentage or BMI, or we just talking about lean in general?
Well, of course, that there are different female body types, and I have a whole book called it's a book I wrote about 6 years ago called "Get Fit Guys: Guides to Achieving Your Ideal Body Type." And what I talk about in that book is the 4 different body types of females. It is ectomorphic, endomorphic, endomesomorphic, and endomorphic. How do I say that again? Ectomorphic,
endomorphic, mesomorphic,
endomesomorphic, which is kind of like pear shape, and endomorphic, which is like apple shape. So essentially, it's like your thin ruler shape, your apple shape, your pear shape, and one that's kind of in between the apple shape and the pear shape. And so that, depending on what size fruit you are, is going to influence that, because you're going to have different predispositions to holding on to a certain amount of body fat. But, in most females, you generally see, once you get below about 12 to 13% body fat, some of these risk mechanisms with caloric restriction or intermittent fasting kick in. There was a recent study that might kind of confuse people, because I tweeted about it, and it was a study on time-restricted feeding in active females. So we're talking about the exact population, relatively lean, active females. And what they looked at was what happened when these females did resistance training and also intermittent fasting. So this was an 8-week study in which they were intermittent fasting. I believe in this case they were close to that 16-hour mark, and they were also resistance training. And what they found was that these women were, and this should come as no surprise to you if you're listening to the news flashes, able to maintain skeletal muscle hypertrophy and muscular performance improvements even in an intermittent fasted scenario, provided that they were resistance training. Right, so it was time-restricted feeding plus resistance training that found that if you lift weights, that you are able to maintain body mass even if you're a lean, active female who is intermittent fasting. The kicker here is that all this study looked at was skeletal muscle hypertrophy and muscular performance. They didn't look at long-term implications to LH and FSH levels, to estrogen levels, to even some of the other things we tend to see in lean female athletes. For example, the Journal of Strength Conditioning Research just showed that 2 of the biggest risk factors for lean female endurance athletes were very low vitamin D levels and thyroid dysregulation. Right. And so this study didn't look at any of that. It just looked at whether or not you could hold on to muscle. It turns out you can, but that's not the whole picture, right? You have to look at the endocrine picture, and you have to look at the overall fertility scenario. And that does appear to, especially in lean active females who are working out during that fasted window, kick in, and especially kick in once you exceed that 12-hour mark. So ultimately, I don't think that lean females should avoid fasting, but my general recommendations are as follows. If you're a lean, active female, you really don't need to do intermittent fasting longer than 12 hours. Like, finish dinner at 8 p.m., start eating breakfast again around 8 a.m. Furthermore, if you're a lean, active female, I would not be doing hard exercise sessions that are catabolic in that fasted window. meaning that if you're going to exercise in that fasted window, you're going to be better off doing a little bit of yoga, a little bit of swimming, easy walk in the sunshine, 20 to 30 minutes, etc., while you're in that fasted window, and save your workouts to be in a fed state. And this same advice holds true for any guy who wants to put on a bunch of muscle and get maximum protein synthesis. If you're going to use intermittent fasting, do something easy and aerobic during the fasting window, and then save your hard weight training, for example, until, let's say, 4 or 5 p.m. in the afternoon after you've had a lunch around 12 or 1 p.m. that has a decent amount of protein in it. And maybe you're also throwing in like 10 to 20 grams of essential amino acids into your system prior to that workout. We're just talking about people who want to maximize muscle gain or muscle maintenance who also want to fast. So I think that's the best scenario. And if you're interested in the longevity enhancing benefits of fasting, the decrease in mTOR, the improvement in insulin sensitivity, et cetera, all of the physiological variables we know that are beneficial for fasting, well, if you are a lean female or say like a guy who wants to put on muscle, then you can do a longer fast, like get into that fasting window where cellular autophagy really kicks in, which is like 16 plus hours, but do it on a recovery day. Like do it, let's say Sunday is going to be your totally easy day where you're going to laze around, you're going to watch a little TV, read a good book, hang out in a hammock in the sunshine, maybe do an easy walk or something like that, and you're going to fast from Saturday dinner till Sunday dinner. But don't fool yourself into thinking that squeezing in that 3-hour hike or CrossFit Sunday morning session or something like that is going to do you any metabolic or endocrine or hormonal favors if you're also fasting at the same time. So that's my general recommendation for Jenny.
Right. Yeah, good points. Would you say that you have the same exact recommendations in regards to like a fasting mimicking?
Fasting mimicking or an FMD diet being something that, for those of you listening in, kind of is like fasting, but you're eating about 40% or so of the amount of calories you'd normally consume for about a 4 to 5 day time span. And anytime you're doing something like that, or let's say like a liver detox protocol, which would be like what's called a Kitchery cleanse, which I've talked about before on the podcast, any type of spring cleanup or quarterly cleanup for your body, I think it's very wise to, if you want to maintain normal hormone and endocrine status, to dial back the amount of exercise that you do during that period of time. And that's generally the period of time when I'm doing like a 5-day Kitchery cleanse, right? Where I'm, eating Kitchery and ghee and celery juice, protein restriction, 800 to 1,000 calories a day. I'm pretty much sauna, walking, little bit of swimming, some yoga, using more of the workout time that I'd normally be pumping iron for to do things like meditation or time with family. So yeah, just don't try to have your cake and eat it too. Horrible analogy, I guess, for a fasting scenario, but don't try to have your Kitchery, don't try to have your Kitchery and eat it too. So yeah, I think that kind of covers Jenny's question.
Yeah, I think it sounds very similar to some of the recommendations that Joe Mercola has just made in his keto fasting book. So correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that sounds pretty similar kind of in content to what he would recommend as well.
And I interviewed Joe and we talked about this and even some of the historical aspects of fasting that I brought up earlier. So I'll link to that podcast with Joe for people who want to take a deeper dive. And then the other really good guide is Jason Fung's, I believe it's called The Ultimate Guide to Fasting. Do you remember the name of Jason Fung's book?
Complete Guide to Fasting.
You should have named it The Ultimate Guide. If I was in charge of things, it would have been The Ultimate Guide to Fasting. And that's why it's probably
just
not
write
a New York
your own
Times bestseller, because he didn't call it The Ultimate Guide. So
that's it.
Hey Ben, my name is Jack. Just wanted to say a quick thank you for the content that you put out. It has helped make me better physically, mentally, and spiritually. I am 22, just finished my career playing college football, and recently commissioned into the United States Army. Quick question for you. You talked a little bit in episode 398 about the physiological changes in men when they become fathers, which as of about a month ago I am. My wife gave birth to identical twin boys, just like you. As you know, all sleep schedules go out the window. Do you have any tips to improve sleep quality when I am bound to wake up every few hours? These boys have become my top priority, but my health and fitness is very important to me. Any advice would be appreciated. I love your podcast and will always be an avid listener. Thanks again.
Well, my recommendation, Jack, is get yourself some nice, fancy foam earplugs. On top of those, add your Bose or your Sony or your Dre high-end noise-blocking headphones. Pop a Valium, put on a sleep mask, and let your wife do all the work. She will thank you later because you're more present during the rest of the day to care for the family and provide for the family. And that I think is perfectly reasonable logic. Wouldn't you say, Jay?
Yeah. I mean, brilliant reframe too, because I mean, he's going to be much more available during the day. And that's exactly what his spouse is going to be looking for.
You sleep until 7, you wake up, you kiss her on the forehead as she's sitting at the breakfast table with dark circles under her eyes, staring at a soap opera, because that's about all that she can do, sipping on her third cup of coffee. You're refreshed, you've had your 9 to 10 hours of sleep, and you're about to go out and provide for the family and take care of those damn babies by getting them a paycheck. You've had a great night of sleep, and I just think it's a very... anything else would be almost unreasonable and selfish of her to put her foot down and require that you go out and actually wake up during the night or take on a feeding cycle. I mean, that's my opinion.
I couldn't agree more.
I jest, tongue in cheek. What? Okay, so what can you do? Well, being a father of twins and having gone through this myself, and also helped out a lot of people who are either shift workers or they're going out for buds training or anything else where sleep is going to be very sparse, but you do want to combat a lot of the effects of sleep deprivation. I have some specific recommendations for you. So first of all, for improving sleep quality when you're waking up every 2 to 3 hours, I am a huge fan of micro sleeps or micro naps and getting yourself into that micro sleeping or micro napping sleep phase as quickly as possible. There is some evidence, and I talked about this in the podcast that I did with Jim Poole from the company New Calm, that in the right state, especially with the use of technology, 20 minutes of rest can simulate a full 90-minute sleep cycle. And in my opinion, the two best ways to do that are, number one, if you're going to use technology, that New Calm device, even though it's expensive, is absolutely amazing when you are low on sleep or sleep deprived or need to squeeze in the equivalent of a full sleep cycle without laying there for 90 minutes to get through a full sleep cycle. It's 20 minutes, and I've done that in a sleep deprived state, just the 20 minutes, and you wake up and you're good to go. You kind of slip into this in between, like an unconscious and a conscious state. It's very difficult to describe unless you've done it. But it involves an app that plays sound and then this vagal nerve stimulator that you put on. Yeah, it's expensive, but in my opinion, worth it if you plan on using it for the rest of your life. So the New Calm is very good.
Yeah. Does your Aura ring pick up that data?
No, because the Aura ring typically only kicks in during a full night of sleep. So no. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, gotcha.
The other kind of poor man's version of this would be to go to YouTube and just grab any Yoga Nidra track. That's Yoga Nidra. And Yoga Nidra is something that can also do a pretty decent job simulating a sleep cycle without you actually needing to fall asleep. They're typically 20 to 30-minute sessions, and many people swear by those. I was using Yoga Nidra for a while before I bought the New Calm. But in my opinion, the New Calm is better just because it's better living through technology to simulate a sleep cycle. But New Calm or Yoga Nidra for micro naps, whether during the day after you've been low on sleep or even at night when you just need to catch sleep in between feedings, both of those are decent strategies. The other thing from a technology standpoint that I like to get you back to sleep faster after you have gotten up and done a feeding would be the SleepStream app. It's like a DJ for sleep. It can play binaural beats. It can play pink noise or white noise or cover up ambient noise in case you've kind of done your feeding and it's your wife's turn, or you know that you've got a clear series of hours to sleep. The SleepStream app, of all the different apps out there are others like Brain FM and Ziz and a whole bunch, but I think SleepStream is probably the most versatile. It's easy. It's like I think it's like $2.99 on the Apple Store or the Android store. So
it's cheap.
Pretty cheap, pretty versatile, and it has paid purchases within the app where you can add in extra meditation or different forms of binaural beats, or you could probably add in the sound of whales screaming out in the ocean, which for some odd reason puts some people to sleep. So
or kids screaming, that could have a paradoxical effect.
Yeah,
just a baby whining.
Yeah,
you never know.
That would be a great addition to the SleepStream app. And let's talk next about what to do when you wake up and you are sleep deprived. So, you know what? Actually, before I talk about that, about how to kind of get through a sleep deprived day, a couple of other things that will help you get back to sleep after you've done your feeding at night. Definitely keep a good pair of blue light blockers next to your bedstand. So when you get up and you flip on the lights and you go in to see the baby, and maybe the baby monitor has a little bit of blue light flickering from it, or you're checking your phone while you're feeding the baby or whatever, you're actually not down-regulating melatonin and getting that big boost in wakefulness that you get from seeing blue light. So I'm a fan of, right now, the company Raw Optics. They do really good red lens blue light blocking glasses. I would have some of those on your bedstand, and I would also install in both the nursery and in your own bedroom, and really anywhere in the night where you need to get up but still have a light, red incandescent bulbs. It's a bulb that is the most simulative, which is a word I think I just made up, of fire or torch light, complete absence of blue light in those type of light bulbs. So red incandescent bulbs in the baby's room and in your room, master bathroom, anywhere where you're going to be getting up and wandering around during the night. And then wear the red light glasses as well, just because you're inevitably going to run into some scenarios where you're looking at some blue light as you're getting up and walking around as well. It'll just help you get back to sleep faster after you've gotten up.
Yeah, the blue light blockers, especially Raw Optics, did wonders for me when my baby was crying like a madman in the middle of the night, and my wife just couldn't take it anymore, so she would tap out, of course, like she should. These things, they worked wonders.
Yeah, they've got good wraparound versions. I just like the technology in those lenses is, in my opinion, as far as the wavelengths of light that they stop, the best. So grab yourself some Raw Optics. And then a couple of other things that I would do to get yourself back to sleep faster. One other thing that I would do would be CBD can work pretty effectively. The problem is a CBD capsule can take 30 to 40 minutes to hit your system. A CBD sublingual, like an oil, can take quite a bit of time as well, 10, 15, 20 minutes. And if every minute of sleep is valuable to you and you want instant absorption of CBD to help you fall asleep faster after you've gotten up, get a CBD vape pen. That's the fastest way to mainline CBD into your system. You can very precisely dose. I think a hit on a vape pen is usually 1.5 to 2 milligrams. And for brands on that, there's a company called BioCBD that does some really nice vape pens. They don't have propylene glycol in them. I think they're a pretty good blend. They put some other relaxing nutrients in there, like chamomile and valerian and some other things that you can vape. So that one's decent. You could probably even take a hit and blow some of the vape into your baby's face to get your baby back to sleep faster too. Hey, babies!
I just had a visualization of that.
Have endocannabinoid systems, so give yourself a vape and share some with the baby. I'm joking again for people who take me seriously and leave a comment. How dare you require your baby?
Right, exactly. You're gonna get those.
Vape pen. A few other suggestions. I think that the idea of rotating nights with your wife is sound advice, because that allows you one night to get a full sleep cycle while your wife's up and down and getting some sleep, but not great sleep. And then the next night you take a shift, and it allows you to, rather than going every single night of the week with sleep deprivation and interrupted sleep, to go back and forth between a good full night of sleep and then sleep deprivation, then a good full night of sleep and sleep deprivation. And I just think the idea of rotating nights with your wife versus rotating feedings allows you to go back and forth as far as getting a good solid night of sleep. So I think that's one thing to think about. And then finally, during the day, research has shown that both short bursts of high intensity exercise, like 10 minutes of a kettlebell swing or an air assault bike workout, or longer 40 to 60 minute bouts of easy aerobic endurance exercise are the two best forms of exercise to do if you're in a sleep deprived state. So for your workouts, you can either do quick 10-minute high intensity bursts rather than like going to the gym for a hard 60-minute session, break that into 6 different short sessions during the day, or just do easy aerobic endurance exercise or some variant of both. But those are the two flavors of exercise that work best and even seem to combat some amount of sleep deprivation. So do that from an exercise standpoint. And then from a supplement standpoint, the two best supplements that I've found for combating sleep deprivation, one is any of the nootropics from the company Qualia, especially Qualia Mind or Qualia Focus. If you're sleep deprived, 5 capsules of Qualia Focus, or I think it's 7 to 8 capsules of Qualia Mind. For me, you can charge hard for like 6 to 8 hours on that stuff. Have good word recall, good memory, good cognitive performance. So I'm a fan of those from a more natural nootropic standpoint. And then, of course, the anti-narcoleptic drug that's used off-label by many folks who want to enhance productivity in either a sleep-deprived state or just charge through a day without feeling a need to take a nap would be modafinil. And modafinil can work very well in these type of scenarios. You can build up tolerance to it. It can kind of alter your personality a little bit. I think it plays a little bit with dopamine levels to where you can almost be a little
definitely.
bit more of a non-emotional workaholic when you're on modafinil, I guess is the best way to describe it. You kind of turn into like a robot. So it might not be the best thing to take before a church potluck, but if you just need to get through the day in a sleep-deprived state, modafinil or Qualia Focus / Qualia Mind are all pretty good.
Right. Okay, so you're saying modafinil to be taken during the day, because at first I thought you were saying at night. I was like, holy crap, man.
Yeah.
I'd be amped.
Take it during the day when you're sleep deprived. So those would be my biggest recommendations. Don't give your wife modafinil or Qualia, as neither of those are something you want in the breast milk. The CBD, it doesn't appear that that's going to be a big issue for breastfeeding mothers, but that's something you want to talk to your physician about, I need to say. However, those are my biggest recommendations, and I will, if you go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/399, link to all the different things that I touched on and recommended there. So.
Yeah. Hey, so Ben, I would say one thing too that I kind of learned and wish I would have integrated into my routine as a new parent is I'd also recommend to Jack to really watch out for overexposure to EMF when he wakes up. So my opinion, turn off the damn Wi-Fi router, turn off and stay away from things that could be emitting EMF because that can keep you up, especially if he's super electrosensitive. So that might be the only thing that I recommend. Also too, like I ended up buying a phone case when my wife was pregnant to block EMF. I got it was either a Defender Shield or one of those, the other one. I forgot the other brand that's big, but that's kind of the only thing I might add to that.
That's silly. Electricity is invisible.
That's so silly.
It doesn't affect calcium channels or cell membranes or anything like that.
What am I
silly.
thinking?
All right.
I am
Don't listen to Jay
absolute
and his
idiot.
tinfoil hat. All right. Here we go. Next question.
Hi, Ben. My name is Jackie. I live in Japan, and I've been a longtime listener to your podcast. I really appreciate all that you do for the community. I have a question for you, and I'm wondering if it's possible to have full-blown tendonitis, plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendonitis in both feet and still have a C-reactive protein level of 0.01 to 0.03. Thanks in advance.
All right, so this is an interesting question. C-reactive protein, or CRP, that's a protein that increases in the blood when inflammation is present or when infection is present, in some cases following a heart attack or surgery or a trauma, which is why if you go and get a blood panel, you do want to note to yourself whether or not you exercised hard the day prior, because if CRP is elevated, your doctor might freak out and tell you need to go get a cardiovascular workup when in fact, it's just because you were bench pressing the day prior. So there's some evidence that persistent low level of inflammation that is often indicated with elevated CRP plays a pretty major role in things like atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease and a few other chronic disease risk factors. So typically it's an HS-CRP test, and the question here is it possible to go and test your CRP and have it be low but still have some of these full-blown injury type of mechanisms going on? And the short answer is yes. And it's just a matter of understanding the difference between acute versus chronic injuries, the difference between something like tendonitis versus tendinosis. For example, tendonitis, that's the inflammation of a tendon, results from micro tears that happen when the musculotendinous unit is acutely overloaded with this tensile force that's too heavy or too sudden. And that's a very common issue with something like, the Achilles tendon. Now, tendinosis is a degeneration of the collagen, and that's in response to chronic overuse or chronic tendonitis. When overuse is continued after a state of tendonitis, for example, without giving the tendon time to heal and rest. So that would be like a repetitive strain injury, the formation of scar tissue, and even small things like clicking a mouse too repeatedly that can cause tendinosis. So it's one of these chronic repetitive motion type of issues. Now, if you look at tendonitis, which is more of like this acute inflammation scenario, that is indeed associated with an elevation of many inflammatory markers. And this is why in the acute phase of an injury or in a state of tendonitis, many anti-inflammatory protocols such as, let's say, pulsed electromagnetic field therapy or icing or hot-cold contrast therapy or the use of a variety of different anti-inflammatory herbs and spices like turmeric or glucosamine, etc., those can be pretty good at controlling that acute inflammatory state. But after a while, sometimes the inflammation can subside to a certain extent, at least to the extent where a measurement like HS-CRP is not elevated, but pain and discomfort and a lack of mobility can persist simply because of scar tissue buildup and almost like this low-level inflammation that's not necessarily detectable with something like a CRP evaluation. So that's kind of the thing you need to think about is the difference between a chronic and an acute injury. And managing an acute injury does really come down to, some of the common recommendations for rest and ice and compression and elevation. But when you look at a chronic injury, especially something like Achilles tendonitis or patellar or plantar fasciitis, in many cases you need to do things like Graston therapy or scraping to lay down the scar tissue a little bit better, things like ultrasound or pulsed electromagnetic field therapy or infrared and red light therapy to allow for better healing and more oxygen delivery to the tissue. In some cases, eccentric loading, like actual a lengthening of that muscle via things like reverse calf raises, especially for Achilles tendonitis, paradoxically seems to actually help that tendon to repair a little bit better. You think about this way with these chronic injuries is you want to strengthen them, especially with things like eccentric strengthening, while also realigning that scar tissue with a lot of different myofascial techniques like deep tissue work and scraping. And then also you want to improve oxygenation with things like pulsed electromagnetic field therapy or infrared light. And those are all protocols that can help out quite a bit with chronic injuries, even if CRP is not elevated. So that's what I would consider when it comes to this. I mean, kind of a brief answer to the question, but ultimately the answer is yes. It's possible to have both plantar fasciitis and full-blown Achilles tendonitis in both feet and have a low C-reactive protein level. A couple other things I should mention is that I've done pretty extensive podcasts on both of those issues. If you were to go to bengreenfieldfitness.com and search for them, I have more extended treatises on what to do about either of those conditions. And then the other thing, of course, is I would be remiss not to shamelessly plug Keon Flex. It is the most efficacious shotgun formulation for both acute and chronic injuries. Works very well. I typically recommend folks pop 8 to 12 of those at night on an empty stomach when they're injured. And it's just a blend of everything from turmeric to acetyl myristoleate to glucosamine to a whole host of factors that can assist with the formation of collagen and elastin and fibrin to decrease in fibrinogen, decrease in CRP. So I would definitely grab yourself some Keon Flex. I know that's shameless, but I got to say it.
Hey, Ben. I enjoy the podcast, and I have a question about my Juve Go. And what I'm curious about is how close you should put it to your body. And in particular, you mentioned your wife using it on her face. And I'm just curious how close she puts it to her face and how close she puts it to her eyes. I find myself, as I'm leaving this question, imitating you. So that's interesting to me. But besides the point, here's the thing. In the manual, they say go 2 to 6 inches. But they do not mention anything about don't put it right on your skin. There's no warnings, right? So I just put it, when my knee hurts, I just put the Juve Go right on my knee. I just lay it right on my knee for 10 minutes. And it feels better. But the face, I'm curious about that. That's what I'm curious about. I know it's a tricky question to answer, perhaps, but I appreciate it. Bye.
Well, I personally like to just take something like an infrared light device and duct tape it to my body. And typically I'll leave it there until burning persists with extreme discomfort. And then I'll remove the duct tape, let it rest for a couple minutes, then put it back on. So that's how I do.
Yeah, reasonable. I think burn is a form of hormesis, right? So I mean,
exactly.
Nothing wrong with that.
No, actually, with red light therapy, which my wife was using for some of the benefits to increase circulation and better oxygen delivery to tissue, like I was just talking about when it comes to Achilles tendonitis or plantar fasciitis. But then she was also doing it primarily for a lot of the research-proven benefits for red light for stimulation of the production of collagen and repair of the epidermis. It can work particularly well in situations where you have scar tissue or stretch marks or cellulite or anything else like that you need to heal. Sounds gimmicky, but there's actually good research behind cellulite, behind collagen, and behind scars, in particular in response to red light therapy. Now, infrared tends to penetrate more deeply into tissue and work on more elements like deep scar tissue, mitochondrial activation, ATP production, nitric oxide production, etc. But red light seems to work a little bit better on surface issues. If you look at something like the Juve, typically most of their devices are combinations of infrared and red light, which is why when you look at a Juve panel, often it looks like only half the lights are lit up. Well, that's because the infrared spectrum is not visible. So you're seeing the red light, but they're generating both red light and infrared light, which is why I'm a big fan of those lights. I'm also a big fan of them.
Well, that's what they like you to think, is that they're on. I'm kidding.
No, I've measured. I have faith. I have faith that they're on. Yeah,
I have faith too. I was just kidding.
Science every time. So the idea is that in terms of the distance and the amount of time that you use something like a red light device, it comes down to the key units of measurement for any red light generating therapy. And this is why some are more expensive than others. The dose is measured as the joules per centimeter squared. So that's the amount of energy delivered to any area of your body for any given time period. The power density is the power output from the light. That's typically milliwatts per centimeter squared. And then time is the time of seconds of actually being exposed to the light. So if you use a device like a Juve, for example, that has an intensity of 100 milliwatts per squared centimeter, and you use that for 60 seconds, that would be 6 joules of energy that are being delivered. And when you look at the number of joules necessary for most of the beneficial effects of red light and infrared light, typically with a device that has a power of around 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared, you can get all the benefits you need in about 5 to 15 minutes if you are 2 to 6 inches from the device. right? So that's why many low power devices, or even the sun, right? You need to be out in the sun for 1 to 2 hours to get that amount of infrared or red light. Many inexpensive devices on Amazon, unfortunately, because the power is low, you have to be in front of the light for a long period of time. And then you also run the risk, if it has a high amount of non-native EMF, which we've well established, Jay is very concerned about, you're exposed to that non-native EMF for a long period of time. So that's why I'm a fan of, and Juve isn't paying me to say this, but that's why I'm a fan of something like the Juve, because it's got high power, resulting in the need for lower time exposed to the device, but low amounts of EMF, so you're not getting exposed to high EMF at the same time. So using something like that, 2 to 6 inches for 5 to 15 minutes is a decent amount of time to be in front of the device. However, there is zero evidence that there's any harm in putting the device right on the skin. The only thing you need to realize is that your time exposure or your need for a certain amount of time might decrease. For example, if that thing's right against the skin, especially if it's infrared light combined with red, because infrared is it's gonna basically dissociate nitric oxide from a part of the electron transport chain called cytochrome C oxidase. You do that too much and you can create excess oxidation, excess free radical production. That's why more is not better when it comes to infrared and red light therapy. So the closer this thing is to your skin, the less time that you'd need. So if I were literally sandwiching a device right on top of my skin, I wouldn't go any longer than about 5 to 10 minutes if you're doing it that way. If you're 2 to 6 inches away, which is what most of the recommendations are, well, then you can go as long as 20 minutes, even though I think 15 minutes suffices. And my own personal protocol, just so folks know, is I own one of these Juve panels. I have the one called the Juve Elite, which is 6 different panels. And then I have one of those in front of me, one of those behind me, and every morning I stand sandwiched in between those two for about 10 minutes. And, I used to say, and this was an error, right? I used to say a long time ago, I'll just leave that on while I work for an hour. After looking into the research, especially on the cytochrome C oxidase piece and the fact that more is not better, I don't go that long at all. And 10 minutes I think is like the sweet spot for me with that type of setup. So yeah, and we have I believe we have discount links for Juve, all that jazz. So I'll put a link in the show notes. I don't even know if it's a discount code or if you just use our special code and order from
you
Juve,
get a gift,
free hat, some crap like that. So. Yeah, that's it. Speaking of free crap, should we give something away?
Oh, let's definitely give something away. I got a pretty sweet review by a pretty sweet individual, so I'm gonna read it out. This one is by Guitar for God. I love that. That's hardcore. That's me as a '90s kid, I would have gone with that one. But Guitar for God. And it's entitled "Only Listen If You Want to Be Stronger, Faster, and Smarter." And it's a little bit of a lengthy one, but I'm going to go for it. All right, here we go. After just a few episodes of the Ben Greenfield podcast, I found myself going through my pantry, reworking my training protocols, and taking care of my body outside of my daily gym visit. As a casual, quote-unquote, athlete, I've always struggled to find balance between achieving the aesthetic look I want and being truly healthy. This podcast provides me a great understanding of the human body and nutrition, and I find myself less concerned about the athletics as they happen naturally. As I try to navigate the ocean of information in the health and fitness universe, Ben and his guests' knowledge have been a fantastic grounding point. My BS radar has been honed in, and I feel more confident in my decisions. Plus, it seems every time I find something that Ben hasn't covered, he usually ends up talking about it shortly after. Look at that, being able to read minds. If you're like me and don't have enough time to sort through the hundreds of fitness podcasts out there, subscribe to the Ben Greenfield podcast. You'll get everything you need. That was a good one. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't know you could read minds,
You
Ben.
pick the reviews. I have to ask you, Jay, are you a fan of Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky or Great Expectations by Charles Dickens or Moby Dick or any of these annoyingly long novels? link.
I am, which would only make sense why I
felt
this
like that was a
one.
Jane Austen novel. That was nuts. Or maybe War and Peace, Leo Tolstoy. War and Peace.
Right, War and Peace.
So, well, it was a good
The
review.
Art of War.
And so we will send free shit out for that. And not just because it was long, but it was good. And if you're listening to the show and you go leave us a nice review on Apple Podcasts or wherever fine podcasts are found, and we read your review on the show, then we'll send you a free gift pack with a cool T-shirt and a beanie and water bottle, all BGF branded. Just email, if you hear your review read on the show, email gear@bengreenfieldfitness.com with your T-shirt size. We'll get some free stuff your way. It's got to be better than the Juve hat, I'm sure. So, anyways, what was the name of that? Guitar for God?
Guitar for God.
Thank you for the kind review, good sir, with a unique handle.
Indeed.
And I think that covers everything. Everything we talked about. It's over at bengreenfieldfitness.com/399. Hopefully we offended all of the new mothers out there, all of the lean females, all the, I guess, every newborn parent and anyone with Achilles tendonitis. That's our goal, is just to offend as many people when we record these shows. So hopefully we did a good job at that. And of course, anyone who fasts, you all have newfangled eating disorders, just so you know. Look into that.
Exactly.
So,
right. I diagnosed you. No, I didn't. Do not
all
say
right,
that.
Jay. Well, thanks, man.
Yeah, man. It's been a good one.
Well, thanks for listening to today's show. You can grab all the show notes, the resources, pretty much everything that I mentioned over at bengreenfieldfitness.com, along with plenty of other goodies from me, including the highly helpful Ben Recommends page, which is a list of pretty much everything that I've ever recommended for hormones, sleep, digestion, fat loss, performance, and plenty more. Please also know that all the links, all the promo codes that I mentioned during this and every episode help to make this podcast happen and to generate income that enables me to keep bringing you this content every single week. So when you listen in, be sure to use the links in the show notes, use the promo codes that I generate, because that helps to float this thing and keep it coming to you each and every week.